There we go. We're recording. So I'm Elizabeth Hurtubise. I've been the one that's been putting together these presentations, but not without the help of Beth Lelii, who is our ACE title agent here in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And in addition to handling a fair amount of residential, Beth handles all of our commercial work. And we do a fair amount of commercial work for home builders, office park developers, and hotel developers. So we get a nice little mix. Oh, and strip centers.
Correct.
So we get a nice little mix of commercial work. And somebody had suggested in one of my other presentations that it would be nice to kind of talk about the differences between residential and commercial. So on the screen, I'm sharing just the topic, commercial versus residential. And Beth and I are just going to talk about all of these issues as we approach the differences between a commercial deal and a residential deal. And first and foremost is that the residential, the Real Estate Sales and Procedures Act, RESPA, does not apply to commercial. RESPA is an act that was designed to protect residential buyers, and it does not extend its protections to commercial buyers. So there's not as many disclosures required, and there's not as many legislative hoops to jump through on a commercial deal. You want to address the multifamily and the difference between these residential and commercial, Beth?
Sure. So if a property is less than 4 units, it is considered residential. Over 4, it flips into the commercial category. There's also some other guidelines that can help with that. If you're living in one, sometimes that'll affect how it's handled, or if it's typically totally residential, then that will change things also.
So if you have a primary house and you're buying a second house, that's typically considered an investment property, right?
Correct.
And then that would be a commercial. It could be residential, but it would depend on how often you rented it out.
Right. Well, it would always be residential. If it's under 4 units, it would just be a second home, which takes you into a totally different realm as far as financing and stuff. But
from a title standpoint, you still get your owner's policy on your investment property, just like you would
absolutely
if it were just your regular home.
Yes.
Is there anything else you need to worry about if you're buying it as an investment property from the policy that you would get, or is the policy going to be the same as long as it's just under 4 units?
Yeah, the policy would remain the same unless the lender involved specifically asks for different types of endorsements, but that would come from the lender itself. If they don't, and normally under 4, if it's an investment property, they don't. But every once in a while we do get one where they will, and in that case it's just a fee that's added to the sheet for closing.
So down payments typically 20% or more in a commercial deal, typically 10% in a residential deal. That also is the trigger for investment property. But the real important issue, and Beth just touched on it, is the policy remains the same, but the endorsements is where the policy becomes unique to that property. So typically in a residential deal, on a lender policy, there are 3 endorsements: the 100, the 300, and the 900.
In Pennsylvania.
Yes. In Pennsylvania, those are ALTA is the organization that sets the endorsements, and then every state kind of tweaks them a little bit for their own use. But a typical lender in a residential will require those 3 endorsements, and they cost $100 each. So there's not a significant add-on to your buyer when they have a lender and the lender asks for the endorsements. But when you get to a commercial property, the endorsements can, depending on the size of the deal, a lot of the endorsements are 20% of the premium. The premium's based on the sales price. The endorsements can go into the hundreds of thousands pretty quickly.
Yes.
So some of the endorsements that are, in addition to the typical ones that you see, the 3 typical ones, The commercial endorsements, can we talk about some of the more typical ones?
Yes, so one that we always see is the access entry endorsement, which guarantees the lender that there is a way to get in and out of the property.
Okay, and so in order to give that endorsement, we have to do some research.
Correct.
And we have to either look at Google Maps to see if there's a curb cut, if there's an established entrance, or if it's raw land, a lot of times we'll come in and ask for an ALTA survey.
Correct.
So the ALTA survey, ALTA again being the national organization that sets the standards for title and survey, has very specific requirements that must be shown on the survey. And they're fairly expensive to get because they have to have the title report in advance, the surveyor does, to go through and put all of the easements on that plan. And then it has to be certified over to the title company and the lender so that we can rely on that in issuing that endorsement. And I think in a state like Pennsylvania where surveys aren't common, that can hold up a deal pretty quick because you've got to get the surveyor out there to do it. So knowing ahead of time that that's a standard endorsement for a commercial lender is where I think the agents in a commercial deal can really add value. And basically, when I put this together, I was thinking about what can real estate agents do to add value in a commercial deal. And it's typically a very different role than in a residential deal. In a commercial deal, the agent is the gatherer of all of the information. Especially if there's not attorneys involved. And if there's an attorney involved, they'll nudge out the realtor and try to get more control over the workflow. But if there's not an attorney involved, or if the attorney has been told, hey, back off, I'm not going to pay you $300 an hour to track down a survey, they'll turn to the agent. And if there's a commercial property that's already fully leased, the listing agent is going to be the one that's responsible for getting those leases together, submitting them. They'll all be part of the due diligence, and those leases will have to be submitted. The lender is going to ask typically for an SNDA, which is a subordination and non-disturbance agreement. It basically says all of the tenants have to sign it, and they submit it as part of their due diligence practice. It says that they understand that their lease is subordinate to any mortgage that the lender puts on the property. And that's a requirement in a large commercial office building would be 80% of those have to be received before closing. And that'll be something that'll be in a closing letter. Can you talk about the closing letter a little bit when we get that from a commercial lender?
The CPO?
Yeah, no, there's a closing protection letter on both, but
yes.
There's the letter we get from the lender
Gotcha.
with the 5 pages of requirements.
So typically we will receive instructions from the lender, things that and it will tell you everything that everybody in the deal is responsible to do. So as Elizabeth said, it could be 5 pages long. Title could have 5 or 6 things. The borrower could have 22 things. And we have to follow those in order to get to closing. And they really vary per the deal that we're doing with each one. So, and they get more involved the bigger obviously the property is.
Yeah. Which we can talk a little bit about that. We talk about the property analysis. You do your home inspection and your residential, and you check off which things. You may have a mortgage contingency, the home inspection contingency. You may do a radon test. But typically that's as in depth as that inspection goes. And you can get it done in 30 days pretty easily. In a commercial deal, the due diligence is part of it is that 5-page letter, but it's also internal things that the borrower or the buyer is looking for that they need to do in their due diligence. So they'll do typically an entire building property inspection. Obviously, a 5-story commercial office building is going to have a lot more systems to keep it running that are going to have to be inspected. They're going to do an in-depth survey. They're going to look into the zoning to make sure that the uses that they want to use for that property are appropriate in that zone.
In the subdivision.
And that it's been subdivided. A lot of times there will be an office condominium, which doesn't look like an office condominium, but it is, and we need to discover that and grant you endorsements for that. That's also another endorsement that gets added on in a residential. If there's a homeowners association or a condominium association, there's an endorsement that the lender requires for that as well.
Yeah. So
the big role that a realtor in this deal, in due diligence, much in the way in a residential deal, you're setting up the home inspections and the radon tests and environmental test. The agent in a commercial deal adds tremendous value if they're the ones tracking down the HVAC inspections, the zoning, running around, picking up the, getting the survey, making sure that the survey has the easements that are in place. Checking the rent rolls, going through if there's an SNDA, checking to see if there is a condominium, if there's a dues, what does the condominium do for the office, who runs that, are the fees paid, those kinds of questions that a commercial agent can add to the value to the property, and looking for all of those. And those are all things that we as a title insurance company will ensure once that information has been collected. The other thing that title insurance covers in a commercial deal is the business related risks. So when they're looking at which endorsements the lender is going to require and how those are going to be priced, the title company is looking at what if there is a total loss of property, if there's a something in title that it no longer will be able to be used as an office building. The zoning was wrong or there wasn't an access and there's a total failure of the property. Not only is it just the value of the property, but there's lost income there that also needs to be accounted for. So that adds tremendous amount of money to the coverage, because the coverage is now for not just the property, but for the loss of value. So those are all decisions that come in, and from an underwriting standpoint, which endorsements are we willing to give and which do we charge a significant amount of money because the risk is greater. We talked a little bit about leases already, trying to make sure that we get copies of all the leases and an SNDA if the lender is requiring that. You don't typically get that in a residential property, although if you're buying an investment property and it's occupied and you're looking at that rental stream on just a single family house, you're going to want to take a look at that lease as well. But it's the difference between looking at one lease and looking at 15 leases, if that's something that we need to do. And when you have a lease, talk about the assignment of rents and leases a little bit.
Yeah, so the only thing I do is sometimes on an investment property, they will put something into the mortgage where it does allow the mortgage company to collect the rent if they fall behind on their rent. So that's could be a maybe.
In the lender part,
in the lender, well, more on the coming
mortgage.
from the mortgage side. The assignment of rents and leases on the commercial side basically gives the lender the right to collect that if the financing or if the owner is not paying or collecting, that gives them the right to go in and do that.
So they collect the lease money and
Correct.
rental money instead of getting their mortgage, not instead of getting their mortgage
Right.
payment, but while they're
Just
not
to
getting
help it. Yes.
So in the order of recording, when we're doing a commercial deed, can you talk about how we record things?
Yes. So in a commercial deal, the first thing that goes on record obviously would be the deed if there is one. We also do a lot of refinancing of commercial properties. So in this case, if it's a sale, the deed goes first, and then the mortgage is in the order that they're that we've been told to record them in. And then goes the assignment of rents and leases after that. And sometimes there's a collateral assignment, which would go last in a large one. In a residential, it's always the deed and then the first mortgage. Sometimes there's a second mortgage that would go after that.
So typically, not typically, but frequently in some of the larger commercial deals, there will be multiple lenders. So there will be the primary lender that'll take first position, so their mortgage gets recorded first. And then there'll be either a secondary lender or a mezzanine finance lender who would come in the second, third, or sometimes even fourth position, depending on how they've structured the loan. And at some points, and I think we've had this once, if the loan value is and the purchase price is so high, thinking like 80 million or more, sometimes the lender will even require that there be two title insurance companies underwriting that loss. They don't want one title company responsible for the full $80 million loss, so they'll require that there be two, and they'll split the policy and then the liability between the two agencies. So for instance, United Land Transfer, their primary underwriter is Fidelity. If we were doing a large $80 million commercial deal for ULT, it is a possibility that the lender would say, okay, I'm glad I've got Fidelity on the hook for 40 million, but I want First American on the hook for the other 40 million. And we would work together to split that, both the premium and the liability between the two parties.
Yes.
So the timing is super important to keep in mind. We've gotten now to a place where we're closing a lot of deals in 30 days for your kind of average residential deals. And I think that that's probably mostly a reflection on the fact that in the last 50 years, we've been able to automate so much more.
Correct.
So that we can get information quickly to people instead of having to put it in the mail and it get there in, a week maybe. We can send it via email immediately. The communication and electronic searching of files has gotten us to the point where on a standard residential deal, we can close within 30 days. The time to close for a commercial deal, if you're budgeting when you're going to collect that commission,
Yeah.
It may be this year, it may not be.
Correct.
Can you talk about some of the things that hold up closing?
There's so many things that could hold up closing, and typically it's at least 90 days, but in the larger commercial deals, you're looking at probably 3 to 6 months before they close. A lot of the due diligence takes time, so while we may get the title order, we're then kind of in a hold pattern until all of that gets approved, and then it's kind of like, hurry up and let's do this. I would say that's probably the biggest thing that keeps, and then of course the lender requirements from the borrower sometimes take some time for them to clear up as well.
What are we looking for when we get the agreement of sale and it's between a partnership and an LLC or a corporation? What additional documents are we looking for that we record or that we just have to have in our file to review to make sure that we've got the right signer?
Yes, so we're always looking for their operating agreements and who has the ability to sign. There may be 5 or 6 people that are part of that organization. And if there is nothing in writing, we would expect that all 5 or 6 have to sign. Typically, they tell you who has the ability to sign on real estate deals. It may be one person, it may be 2. Everyone can be different. So.
And sometimes the operating agreement will have a limit as to how much they can sign for.
Correct.
And if they've gone over that limit,
then there has to be an addendum to the operating agreement in order for it to work for us. We just have to be real careful that we have the right people signing for the corporation or the limited partnership.
Yeah. I know we've talked about this before in some of our other classes. When the seller is an LLC and then the seller is, nobody's really met the seller and the seller is unavailable for closing, we start to get really nervous because when the seller is an LLC, and there's no loan on the property is another red flag. We want to make sure that somebody hasn't gone into the public records and looked for property owned by an LLC that is not encumbered by a mortgage. Because that property, it's super easy for a fraudster to take the name of the LLC. So it's, Beth and Elizabeth Real Estate LLC. They can create an operating agreement for Beth and Elizabeth LLC. They can register that document in the state. They can say, you know, who we are. But we're not the actual owners of the property. So somebody else goes to close. They pretend they're the Beth and Elizabeth LLC. They've got the documents. They've got a photo ID. They can take that property and basically steal it from the LLC.
Right.
So we're looking at both sides of the transaction in a commercial deal. We want to make sure that the seller is who the seller is and the seller owns the property. And then from the bank standpoint, they want to make sure that the borrower is who the borrower is. And will likely, it's not unusual for them to ask for personal guarantees. In addition to whoever is signing the mortgages, they want personal guarantees from those people as well.
And with any deal, even a residential, we're going to require proof of who is able to sign for the LLC or the corporation. It would be the same thing. We want to make sure that the person who's signing really has the ability to sign.
So let's see. Repayment terms. So, you know, typically a residential deal is a 30-year mortgage. In a commercial deal, balloon payments are a lot more common and shorter terms. So 5 to 10-year term is common in a commercial financing. Property taxes are typically higher on commercial property than they are on a residential property. And as it is in residential, sometimes the use drives the property taxes. So that's all part of the due diligence to find out what the current property taxes are. And if it's newly constructed commercial, then that may not be available at the time we close, and we'll have to escrow based on what we think the tax assessment might be at the time the property becomes occupied. We do that in residential, but it's a lot easier to do it in residential if there's a residential subdivision that has 50 houses and 4 have already been sold. They've established what their tax rate's going to be. If it's a strip center that used to be a farm, it's going to be very difficult to determine what we think the taxes are going to be for that strip center as it gets occupied. But that's something that the lender is going to want us to help them with, and something certainly that we're going to have to do some due diligence on ourselves to get there. The developmental approval and contingencies is another thing that really drives the fact that we're not going to close in 3 to 6 months. Can you talk about some of those contingencies?
Well, I think we kind of touched on them a little bit. The subdivision approval will definitely take a little while to do the zoning. They have to do their homework and make sure that it is going to be zoned correctly for what they want to use it for. I think probably
one of the things that comes up frequently is when we talked about the order of recording and we said the deed is recorded first. Frequently, if there are subdivision approvals, either for a strip center or a residential subdivision approval, that plan has to go on record before we can do the closing, because that's the plan that creates the lots that we are closing, or guarantees to the lender that's all of the approvals necessary to build or construct this property are in place. So we have closings that are scheduled for like the day after the township meeting.
Yes.
Because they have to get their approvals. And then frequently we're asked to record those plans, and that can be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? What can a realtor or agent do to help us make sure that those plans are in recordable form?
I honestly think it's just working with your client and following a timeline to make sure that everything is done correctly in order to get you there. And of course, sometimes we've had some instances, especially lately, where the municipality where the property is, they can be very difficult. So you have to, the client has to get on their township meeting and have their plans approved, and sometimes that can take a while. Just important that you stay involved with them and kind of move it along as best as you're able to.
And keep everybody in the loop the whole time.
Correct.
Having somebody be a point person for communication between the lender, the title company, the buyer, the seller, having somebody take charge of that timeline and basically quarterback the deal through is a huge value added. And I've found that the most successful commercial real estate agents that I've dealt with are the ones that truly take on that role and say, we're going to get this through, and I'm going to make sure that I'm making those phone calls. Because you ink a deal and then it's a year of approvals and then 3 months of financing. You've put a lot of effort and investment into that property, waiting for that payday that could be a year or two out, and
Yes.
you want to make sure that you've done everything you can to get there. And it's the subdivision plan has to be signed off by typically in most jurisdictions it has to be signed off by the township. They have to actually sign the plan. Then that signed plan goes to the county. The county has to sign it. And then it has to go to typically an assessor's office to assign tax lot and block numbers. And then finally it gets of record and recorded. And then that recorded document gets referenced in all of the deeds, the mortgage, anything else that we're recording, including UCCs, which we just briefly mentioned at the bottom. But that developmental or approvals contingencies is probably the single most thing that takes the most time
Yes, it does.
in getting a deal to close. And an agreement of sale is typically going to be contingent upon ascertaining that the development approvals are available. When it is a development and it's raw land, can you talk a little bit about construction financing and how that works? If you get like a construction perm loan or-
Yes. So what we typically see with that is a what they call a construction to perm loan, which is from what I've seen, I'm sure there's different ways that you can set it up. So it's a year of interest payments only, and then at the end of that year, it has to be converted into permanent. So what it says is you have a year to build whatever you're building, and at that time you're going to need to refinance into a permanent loan, which would be a more typical lender loan that they would do for you.
There's also the construction financing loans where they're financing the construction. So instead of giving you the full $80 million at settlement, they're going to give you 30 million, which is maybe your acquisition price. And then you're going to make payments. You're going to ask for draws as the process continues. It is not, some banks will hold the money and give you the draws. Other banks will want to put the money in escrow with your title company, and the title company will do the draws. So you'll have to submit, the borrower will submit typically forms signed off by the architect, and there's a standard AIA form that says we've completed up to this phase of construction, and then the lender would release the money. So either the lender releases the money or they direct the title company to release the money. They always require a bring down of title, which is an update that says from the last time we did title to today, there have been no new mechanics liens or failure to pay taxes or anything else that would affect the title of the property. So when we do the closing and we look to see, oh, there's a construction loan and it's got 18 milestones, so there's 18 draws embedded into the document. One of the other costs that gets added to the sheet is we get paid in advance for those bring downs. They cost anywhere from $65 to $300. We get paid in advance for that so that we're ready to go. We've got the money, we pay for it as soon as we get the request for the bring down. But that's it's another step in the process that a borrower can easily forget. When they're rocking and rolling and they're doing their development, they forget to come back and say, oh, not only do I need the money from the bank, they're pretty good at asking for that, but they take the title company out of the loop and we're not involved. And all of a sudden the bank says, well, where's the bring down? And that can take a day or two. So you need to be aware that that's also happening.
Yes, and typically we'll get request for a bring down, say on Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon, they're looking for it to come in because they need that money to continue with the project. So we have to rush those through as quick as we can.
So one thing that's, if you're, a lot of people look at investment properties and they look at 1031 exchange as a way of controlling your capital gains costs. You can do a 1031 exchange in residential or in commercial. It doesn't matter. The 1031 tax vehicle is available for both. We do a fair amount we probably do 3 or 4 1031 exchanges a year on mostly residential, but sometimes residential, but second homes.
Right.
As long as it's a like kind exchange, so it's an investment property for an investment, a second home for a second home, commercial for commercial, the 1031 exchange program is available.
And I will say we did not see very many of them for a stretch of time, and this past year they seem to have ramped back up again. But they're not hard to deal with. It's most of the work involved is done before they even get to closing with the 1031 exchange, and then the title company just kind of follows the direction of the 1031 as far as how the settlement sheet is signed and that kind of thing. But they're really not hard to deal with at all.
No, and there's a lot of 1031 exchange companies out there. So if you're thinking that your client has a property that would be a good vehicle to put either in a forward or a backward 1031 exchange, shoot us an email. We're happy to give you some suggestions in your geographic area for companies that do that. They also cover a wide geographic area because the 1031 exchange is really not, there's not a lot that's state specific in the way that the exchange works. It's more of a federal tax issue than it is a local issue. Can we talk about the enhanced policy and the differences a little bit?
Well, the first thing is if it's an investment property, the enhanced policy goes away. It's not offered on investment properties, so no second homes, no commercial properties would receive the enhanced property. It's specific to owner-occupied residences.
So if you're a lender and you want the coverages, the extra coverages that an enhanced policy would have on an investment property, you would go about that by requesting endorsements.
Correct. And that basically becomes an enhanced property policy for you. But we don't offer it from our standpoint. It's just a standard policy.
Yeah. And then UCCs are, you don't see them in residential, but you will see them in commercial. It's the Uniform Commercial Code. There's a UCC 1 that is recorded when the lender it comes on record right after the mortgage. They're recorded in the state and the county, and basically it's like a mortgage. The mortgage attaches to the land. The UCC attaches to any property owned by the borrower. And so that's why they do it in the state and in the county, because they want to make sure that they're capturing any property that the borrower may have anywhere in the state. They have like a mortgage, but they have an investment interest in the UCC 1. In my day, when I was representing commercial people as commercial investors, and the lender required a UCC 1, I would also ask that the UCC 3 be prepared at the same time and held in escrow by the mortgage company. The UCC 3 is the document that releases the UCC 1. So it's like a satisfaction of mortgage.
Yes.
You get a satisfaction of the UCC 3. That is a document that frequently gets missed when the deal is done and can come back to title and haunt you 20 years later if you still have an open UCC 1 on the property. Can you talk a little bit about the releases of mortgage and partial releases of mortgage?
So if you, for a partial release of mortgage, usually is when a builder sells the lots, once the homes are built on the lots, then a partial release of mortgage is recorded, which releases that specific lot from the financing, but the rest of the financing stays in place. So we have to obtain a payoff on that specific lot from the lender, which is never the full amount until the very end, obviously, but and then it releases that lot. So then we record the partial release of mortgage. Once it's done and the loan is paid in full, usually everything is released at that point.
And a satisfaction of mortgage
Was
is recorded.
recorded, right? Which takes away the whole mortgage and takes it off the title. So if the person who bought Lot A goes to sell it, there's no more mortgage on that title that the builder incurred.
And that one of the things that we see frequently, because residential property turns over so much more frequently than commercial, the satisfactions are usually done at the same time. So like when we're doing a residential deal, we've got the payoff to, you know, whoever the lender was. We do the payoff and we record the satisfaction of mortgage, or typically the lender records the satisfaction of mortgage in the residential deals. In a commercial deal, it's really on the borrower to make sure that that happens. And sometimes they'll say, hey, will you record the satisfaction of mortgage? And of course, we're always happy to do that when we do the final payoff. But it's because it's not typically done at the time of a sale, it just happens that it's the 5 years is up, it's all paid off. It's harder to remember to go back and make sure that that mortgage is satisfied and released. And that's another item to put on a checklist to remember to do at the end of the deal, when the deal is finally closed out, to go back and get that deal, that mortgage satisfied and released. Sunita asked, our 1031 exchange is a common thing, and I think you said we're seeing more and more of those
Well,
now.
she's asking about the reverse 1031.
Oh, yeah, we see.
Well, I actually just saw my first one this past summer, and we've done one other one since then. So that leads me to believe that they're getting more common.
Can I get the number to call? I actually have a referral client that is asking me about one, and I'm like,
Yeah,
confused.
yes, we have a one that I've dealt with for years, and they're very good and very responsive. I will get you that number and send it to you.
What's a good phone number for you,
Or
Anita?
email.
571-390-3440
And where are you located?
in Virginia.
Okay.
Okay. As soon as we're done here, I will go back to my office and I'll send you that information.
Okay, and just for clarification, the person is trying to do a 1031 from a property that's in Michigan to a commercial property in Michigan, selling a condo in Myrtle Beach.
Oh, good.
Okay. I will send you that. Sure, I'll just check and make sure. I don't think that's a problem, but that would be up to them to decide.
Thank you.
Sure.
So the people that had jumped on the call that knew that we were talking about commercial versus residential, what other things are you seeing? What questions did you hope we could answer for you if you're starting to dip your toes into commercial, or if you're commercial and you're thinking you want to get into residential? What questions did you have before you jumped on the call this morning?
There's actually 203K mortgage. They are primarily an agent for a home that you own, your primary residence, correct? That's not for commercial, I'm aware.
Correct.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I think from my experience, there are residential agents and there are commercial agents. and there's not a lot of interaction between the two. But I think that where the residential starts to creep into kind of the commercial territory are the duplexes, the triplexes, the mixed use where there's retail on the first floor and residential on the second floor. And those typically tend to be the ones where you're getting your first little taste of commercial, and you may come up against a lender who's asking a lot more questions than your typical residential lender is going to ask, and have a lot more requirements. And then you're going to know that you're in the commercial realm, because you're dealing with bank and banks counsel that are going to ask for a lot more due diligence and a lot more information. And that's where you're going to find yourself as the agent scrambling to make sure that all of that information gets over to the lender so that they can close. And that's when it's, it's good to have a title company at that point that does both, so that they know, they're not nervous that, oh my gosh, I've got this letter, 5-page letter from the lender asking for information, and how do I get this together? Because that's not typical in a residential deal at all, that you would get a list like that. The list that we get on a standard residential mortgage is, less than a page long.
Yes, absolutely.
What kind of funny things have you seen in your commercial that you, coming from residential and then starting your commercial career, that did you see that surprised you?
Mostly the involvement, I think, like how involved that you have to get, and also the length of time that it takes to get a larger commercial deal to settlement. I mean, we've had some that are over a year long in our pipeline that close. I think that's that. We've had deals where we've had someone who bought a building that was condos, and he bought all 16 units. So they had to close all simultaneously on the same day, and all had to agree to their price. And so that was a challenging deal that we finally were able to close on that. That was very interesting. And then, of course, we just did one recently, which was a year in the making. So there was 4 loans, 3 different lenders, 4 attorneys involved. And that one, that was probably my most challenging one yet.
Yeah, that actually, the 16-unit condo was a really interesting deal. It was a condominium at the shore in New Jersey that had been severely damaged by one of the storms that came through. And so the entire building holding 16 residential beachside units was condemned, but it was a condominium. So the condominium association still had the interest that the condominium has in all of the common elements, including the exterior of the parking. So the investor came in and negotiated with the condominium association a flat price to buy out the condominium's common ownership interest, but each of the individual 16 unit owners. So he bought them all at, not certainly not fair market value, but they were condemned, so they had no value, but at a huge discount, and then repaired the units and the common structures in the parking lot, and then flipped them basically and sold them. And some of the unit owners bought them back,
Yes.
their unit back, after it had been completed and refurbished. But it was an interesting project to see how, if you're looking at all opportunities and you keep your eyes open and you drive by a condemned building and you've got a little vision, you can turn that into a profitable project if you you put your head to it, and
Yes.
you work with the right people to get it done. So that was an interesting.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note on that one too is those unit owners had not been allowed in that building for over 2 years at that point. So they, many of them still had mortgages on the property that they were required to pay, but they had no use of the property.
So a lot of opportunity out there, and we're seeing in the commercial deals that we do more and more that the fact that there is a commercial deal like that available is usually because it's got some hair on it and it needs a lot of work and creativity and stick-to-itiveness, as my dad would have said, in order to get it through. So they're all a little bit more challenging than they probably were 30 years ago. The ones that are on the market now, the opportunities that are out there, really take a little bit more digging than they used to. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I had missed it, but you had mentioned that you can do 1031 Starker for commercial, residential, and likewise back and forth. Am I correct with that?
It has to be a like kind of exchange. So if it's commercial, you have to identify a commercial property. If it's residential, you have to identify a residential property. If it's an investment property, residential investment, it's residential investment. So you can't take a residential property and put your 1031 exchange monies into a commercial property, and you can't go backwards either. It has to be a like kind. So it's got to be apples to apples, oranges to oranges. You can't take your commercial and invest in residential unless actually you can't. It has to be commercial. It has to be zoned and used for commercial property. The residential investment property is kind of that hybrid. It is zoned residential. It is residential, but because it's an apartment building, it's an investment property, and it's more viewed as a commercial property because of the investment income than it is a strictly residential property where there's and you don't get a lot of income on your primary residence.
Yeah, and then this one that Anita brought up, it's probably best to talk to the 1031 and see.
How they're going to view that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, more than likely, if you're titling under LLC and it's above 3 units or something of the such, it could probably fall under the commercial veil.
Over
Okay.
4 units is typically the number for
Yeah.
the demarcation. But I'll tell you what I'd be happy to do. I know the 1031 people put on a really great presentation, and I would, if there's enough interest in doing a 1031 Monday meeting, I would love to put together a in-depth seminar on 1031 exchanges. Does that sound like something?
That's something I would have an interest in. I do know that Bright has their own company, but I'm always up for more info in that realm. So if anyone else has interest, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Great. I'll look into that and talk to Kristen and David about that. All right, great. We've got a lot. Got 3 people interested. I'll put together one for 1031 exchanges. Okay. Is that it for this morning then? All right, great. All right, Kristen, thanks a lot.